Hey everybody, it's Dr. Leith. This week we're going over disruptive, impulsive, and conduct disorders. These are best characterized as disorders that happen in childhood. They can last into adulthood. But school counselors and those that will work with youth, I would expect you guys to see these most often. And we'll have a pretty short presentation. There's not very many of these, and they're all pretty easy to understand. I think misdiagnosis of these is going to be pretty rare. Before we get started, I just want to check in with everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. I hope your families are well and everybody's staying safe and healthy and you're taking care of yourselves as we're doing this shelter in place. I appreciate everybody's patience as I navigate putting everything online and trying to figure it out. I really, truly appreciate all of your patience and the supportive comments and the constructive feedback. Um, Anybody see Tiger King on Netflix? That's what we've been watching, and it's a one. It's I didn't know this was a thing, but also personality disorders. Right? What might you see when you think of Joe Exotic, Carol, what's her face, the cat lady? We've got some things that might be in the personality spectrum. What traits do you see or not see that might be devoid of or in excess of? In any case, we gotta help these tigers. So a new one for the DSM-5 is intermittent explosive disorder. So this used to be a personality disorder. This is a like a hothead, right? This is someone who loses their cool, and they moved it from personality over here to the disruptive disorders. And the takeaway is it's someone who often gets angry, but because you got to remember, anger is a normal part of life. There's nothing wrong with anger in and of itself, but it's a disproportional anger, right? So, for example, if you went out on a nice romantic dinner date, I take my special lady to Applebee's, and if I order a Dr. Pepper and they bring me Sprite, that is that's an issue. The way everybody would hope I would handle it would be to say, "I'm sorry, I ordered a Dr. Pepper, not a Sprite." But if I freaked out and I took the glass and I smashed it on the ground and I started yelling and screaming and throwing things, that's disproportionate anger, right? If you're walking down a hallway, if you're a teenager, for example, and somebody accidentally bumps into you in the hallway, that might put you off. You might even say, "Hey, watch it." If this child just completely loses their cool, they shove the other kid, they take off their backpack, they start swinging it, they start going into really aggressive stances. That's disproportionate, right? So it's case by case. Anger is a normal emotion, but does the anger match what's happened? Usually what we see with this disorder is the anger, it's a big flash, it's a big explosion, and then it usually dies down relatively quickly within 30 minutes. The key feature here is an inability to control the anger, right? So this is something when you hear the term anger management or I have an anger problem, this is what comes to mind. Something upsets the person and they just implicitly go. Remember we talked about implicit cognition with a binge eating disorder. Something offends me and I just go full autopilot, right? I lose control. And that's really where the diagnosis piece starts coming in. We don't want to diagnose younger than 6. Why do you think that would be? Well, part of the reason is children throw tantrums, right? So when they're younger, that's normal. When a child wants a toy at the store, mom and dad don't get it. They get very angry. They say the most hurtful things. They start freaking out in the store. They're crying. They're throwing. They're hitting. They're biting. That is somewhat normal. We expect children to have less control over their emotions. As they age upwards, as they get older, we expect them to get more control. So, and I always think this is a really neat thing that the DSM does. So there's two ways to diagnose it. One way is if you're seeing consistent and frequent non-harmful physical aggression towards people. So, for example, they're yelling, they're threatening, but they don't hit anybody, they don't break anything, they're not throwing things. It's verbal aggression. I'll beat you up, I hate you, name calling, all of that. Twice weekly for 3 months. Or, so it's not an and, this is an or, damage-causing physical aggression, so fighting, breaking things, vandalism, 3 times in 1 year. So do you see what happens here? As the magnitude of the damage increases, right? I'm breaking things, I'm hurting people. That happens less often in a long period of time, or it can be less severe damage, but it has to happen more often. Moving on, I'm pretty sure everybody's heard of these two: oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder. So just to kind of clear things up, just real quick to kind of cement in your minds, conduct disorder is the more severe of the two. Oppositional defiant disorder is a collection of what we call negativistic behavior for 6 months. And you need, I think, 4 out of the 8 criteria that the DSM lists. These are all nonviolent behaviors. It's nonviolent. You're not violating the rights of others. You're not breaking things. You're not hurting people. You're not hurting animals. You're back talking. You're getting real sassy. You're maybe threatening and things like that, but you're not extorting somebody. You're not setting a fire to the school, anything like that. So this is really kind of attitude, verbal. Conduct disorder, the primary theme here is the child violates the rights of others. And you might recall from the personality disorder discussion, antisocial personality disorder. Conduct disorder is the precursor to antisocial. Right? So one of the criterion for antisocial was you must have a diagnosis of conduct disorder before age 15. So that's what we're talking about. And it really is antisocial personality disorder in a child. There's still the lack of empathy. There's no acknowledgement of the rights of others. So one of the things that you really got to rule out is making sure that there is not a developmental issue, right? That there isn't some sort of arrested development, that there isn't something neurological going on, such as autism or intellectual disability disorder. There's an understanding of the rights of others, and I am choosing to violate them, right? So this would be I'm torturing my peers. I'm hurting animals. I'm destroying property. I'm setting fires. I'm assaulting people, mugging people, breaking and entering, things like that. And you need, of the 15 criteria that they list, you need 3 of them. But again, just like with intermittent, those 3, the magnitude of the damage is higher. So some good movies that show this, an oldie but goodie, the Good Son, right, with Macaulay Culkin. This is the sequel to Home Alone. And then Brightburn, which is newer. It was a very good movie, super creepy though. But yeah, that little jerk's got conduct. So while we're talking about children and behavioral issues, these are your red flags. Anytime you see fire setting or animal cruelty, it is always a red flag. It just depends on what is it a red flag for, right? So let's look at animal cruelty. Think of dogs. A child has a pet dog. the child feeds the dog a bunch of chocolate, the dog gets sick and dies. Well, it's one thing if the child didn't know. It might be a small child who says, the dog is my friend, and I really like this candy, and I'm sharing the candy with my friend. That's not what we're talking about. That was kind of born out of, a child's blissful ignorance versus, I know doing this to the dog is going to hurt it, right? So the child knows this is bad, this is dangerous, and they do it anyway. Same with fire setting. It's one thing for maybe a child to play with matches, or they find their older sibling's stash of fireworks or something, and they set it on fire, thinking they have control of it, versus I'm intentionally going to burn this. When there's intention behind it, there's a knowledge of what I'm doing. We're looking more at the stuff we're talking about now, right? Other red flags, if they're doing it and it's not age-appropriate behavior, then maybe we have an intellectual disability, maybe we have global developmental delay, we have an autism issue. It could be a couple different things, but these are always red flags. Now, optionally, and this is super interesting for those of you that get off on like true crime stuff, when you have fire setting, animal cruelty, and then bedwetting, so imagine a triangle with these concepts at each point. This is called the McDonald triad. And this is what is really common in a lot of serial criminals or career criminals, especially serial killers, right? And so the pattern, and this is all kind of theoretical, look into it, it's super interesting. And there's a couple different models of this. I go into it a little more in depth in assessment, but since we have time, why not? The child has bedwetting, which is what we're going to go into at the end of this, enuresis, right? Just an inability to not wet the bed. They become very ashamed of this. Perhaps they have nowhere to displace that frustration, so they take it out on an animal. And fire setting is cathartic for them, which we're going to cover in Pyromania in a second. So the fire setting is calming, or they might feel a sense of control. I set this fire, look at how strong and powerful I am. The animal cruelty, exerting your own power over something, and the bedwetting, and this cycle continues. So this particular triad is the McDonald triad. Another one, if you're interested, is the dark triad, which would be antisocial tendencies, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. So look those up if you're into personality triads and like the true crime side of things. Kleptomania. Again, I'm pretty sure everybody has heard of this, right? It's stealing for the sake of tension relief. So a couple things you got to rule out. Make sure it's not some other disorder, right, such as conduct disorder, or just, a small child thinking they can just take a toy out of the store and things like that. The other thing you gotta make sure of, we wouldn't diagnose kleptomania if they were stealing something they actually need, right? So in other words, this is not someone who is stealing food for themselves and their family. In fact, it wouldn't even be someone who's stealing, I really want this video game and I can't afford it, so they steal it. It would be, I can't afford this, or maybe I even have the thing and I steal it anyway. So therefore, the purpose of this is not the object being stolen, but rather the process of stealing, right? So a lot like gambling addiction, a lot like binge eating disorder. The binge eating disorder was not about the food that's being eaten. More so, it's about the process of eating itself. Kleptomania, it's not about the object, it's about stealing. And what we would see is the person in a store, and usually what they steal is stuff that's really inconsequential. They're not going for like the crown or something. They're finding nail polish. They're finding a lock. It's something very inconsequential. 9 times out of 10, it's something that they don't even need or particularly want. It's just an opportunity. So they see something and they start feeling this rush. Like, I could steal that. What if I did steal that? and then all the pathways start firing. It's very similar to addiction, right? So this type of addiction would be called behavioral addiction or process addiction. Your pathways start firing. This sounds very good, and I start getting this tension, right? And it's implicit. I start feeling very tense. I can't shake the thought of stealing this thing, and I really start dwelling on it, start ruminating on it. And the only thing that's going to kind of take care of this tension is to steal it. And if I steal it and I get away with it, I get flooded with endorphins. I get all that sweet, sweet dopamine, right? And it feels good. And then it goes from there, because then I want to do it again, and then I want to do it on a higher price item or in a riskier situation, things like that. But again, it's not about stealing because I genuinely want the object or because I need the object. Pyromania, everything I said still applies, only now instead of stealing stuff, we're setting fire, right? So I see an opportunity to set a fire, right? I'm driving home, I go for a run, and I see this vacant lot. Nobody's around it, nobody's going to get hurt. It's very typical for them to think of that this is a safe place, it's confined, not going to get caught, not going to pull suspicion upon myself, nobody's going to get hurt, I'm not going to get hurt. So I see a vacant lot. I start thinking about it, I get the tension, I keep thinking about it, lots of hyper arousal before I'm setting the fire. I set this fire and I'm mesmerized by it. I watch it and I feel the relief. I get the endorphins. I'm relaxed. There's no other motivation. So this is not setting a fire to like pull an insurance scam, right? Like I want to get money out of it. It's not because I'm making a political statement. It's not. This is super morbid. I'm not out to burn anybody. I want to set a fire to watch a fire burn. And some of you might be wondering, well, what about what happens with these individuals? What about firefighters and things like that? Children with pyromania typically go to professions where they get to set or work with fire. It is very common. In fact, a common practice when there's a fire around, people will look around to see who's there, because oftentimes this person with pyromania, they're usually there. They're watching and they're there. Where did they come from? They were there before anybody else, right? And that's usually, if they're just not outright caught like a child, mom and dad follow the child and see what they're doing. This is the other way that the person winds up getting caught, because they're there, they're asked, did you see what happens? When did you get here? And they're kind of put on the spot like that. But again, the purpose of this is the tension relief around fire setting. That's it for this chapter. There's no unspecified ones. The elimination disorders, there's only 2 of them. Enuresis is about being incontinent with urine. You specify, does the person have a problem where it's only at night, so bedwetting at night? Is it only during the day, or is it both? And that's got to be a couple times a month for 3 months, or a couple times a week for 3 months. And anchropresis, which is incontinence with your bowels, going to the restroom without control or in inappropriate places. For both of these, you are having to look at age, right? Age and development. So we're thinking that it's an age where continence would have been achieved. So a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, bedwetting and bowel voiding is developmentally appropriate or expected. When the child is 6, 7, and older, or into adulthood, and there is not a medical reason for it, that's when we start looking at those diagnoses. When you're working with this individual, you might be asking questions like, is it out of your control? Do you do it on purpose? Some of you may have heard of theories where a person does this to prevent assault or molestation, which does happen. So this is something that you'd work with a physician or a pediatrician with, or a developmental person to help try and figure out what's going on. But we're not talking about just one accident. This would be a series over time at an age at which we would expect the child to no longer do this. That's all I got for this week. I hope everyone's well. If you have any questions, please let me know, and please continue to take care of yourselves. Okay, guys, I will talk to you again soon. Bye.